certainly in my family, everyone who has borrowed it, and that's about 10 people, um, all my cousins' children, I mean, who are older now, and my mom, who loved Jane's book very much and urged me when the next literature festival happened that this is a book that we must bring to Goa. So it has all these complicated pandemic circumstances, but I made the invitation to Jane, and she came on her own here. A big, huge round of applause to Jane Borges, whose lovely book Bombay Balchao is now been licensed. It's going to be on it's going to be on television, and we are being honored with Damodar Mauzo, Pride, who has recently won the Jnanpith Award. And I'd love to, Bhai, please come on stage. Let us stand up here and launch the book first. Jay, come please. Bhai, you keep one. And Jane, we will hold it.
Yes.
Congratulations. Please sit. Bhai, you'd like to say something first?
Declare it launch. Thank you, Vivek and Jane, for giving me this opportunity, this honor to launch the book. And I'm very happy to declare that the book, Bombay Balchao, is launched in Goa now. And we don't have to explain to you what Balchao is. And I didn't get the opportunity to go through the book, but I browsed through it, and I really tell you, I enjoyed browsing through it. And I remember having visited Bandra during my college days, early 60s. And I don't think it is changed in this book. Wonderful book, Jane. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Mauzo. It's an honor to have you launch my book here in Goa, and thank you so much, Vivek. You've always been very supportive of my book, and it's a huge privilege for me to be here.
Jane, it's a remarkable thing, because one of the things about the book is we've all moved into the 21st century. But Jane inhabits really this neighborhood, which is a very precious neighborhood. It's Kavel. It's where the first settlement of Goans took place in a profound way in Bombay. And so the genesis of Goan Bombay, but also Catholic Bombay, and then the confluence of these communities, the East Indians, and then even they allowed Mangaloreans by. It was a all inclusive Konkani community. And Jane writes with great felicity about the differences between. That was kind of a joke against my Mangalorean brethren. You're welcome here. But Jane writes with tremendous felicity and also sensitivity about the divisions within, but also about this living community as it comes into the contemporary era. So it's very cinematic, actually. I was seeing all of it in my head, and it's amazing to hear that it's being done. I hope it's done and does it justice. So tell us a bit about that, and how did you come to that world?
Well, Vivek, I belong to Kavel, and I moved to Kavel in 2003. That is, I guess, when the neighborhood was on its last legs, is what I would say. So a very, very quiet neighborhood in the middle of a very, very noisy market. And I've said this again.
Locate it first so people
Yes.
understand. People may not know where Kavel
Okay,
is. It seems like it's maybe in the suburbs or something, but it's not.
So Kavel is in the south of Bombay. We call it South Bombay. It's in this very close to this neighborhood called Dhobi Talao. And I would say there are a couple of neighborhoods, Catholic neighborhoods in this part of town, which became the hub, or rather where Goans first came to Bombay. So you have Dhobi Talao, you have Kavel, and later Dabul. Some of them moved to the East Indian neighborhood of Kotachiwadi. Kavel was actually an East Indian neighborhood in the early 16th, 17th century. But I guess at some point in time when migration started happening from Goa, this became, for some reason, the place where everyone came to. And obviously, when I moved there in, I would say, the early 21st century, there was no spark of its greatness. There's nothing that I could see that would say that this was once a thriving neighborhood. My mum bought the house, and it's a very old house. It's a heritage home, about 120 years old. My mum bought the house just because she had seen it as a child. Her brother stayed there. He'd moved in with his wife there. So she'd seen it as a child, and she wanted to live here. It was her dream. And I didn't understand why such a neighborhood would be her dream. Very, very snooty neighbors around. Everyone was closed, and it was a community that I hadn't been exposed to. Catholics everywhere, a small chapel-like church, and called Our Lady of Health. I guess it was only over a period of time that I came to see what an important place Cavell had within the city. And that is, I think, my journalism that exposed me to Cavell. Every time I would read an old book about Bombay, Cavell would, there would be a line about Cavell somewhere, and nothing more beyond that. But Cavell was everywhere. There were maps of Bombay which had Cavell for some reason. And I would say it's such an insignificant neighborhood to me, a lane, and very few Catholics. I didn't understand why this was the reason. The more I engage with the city, the more I started talking to my family about their roots, I realized that for some reason there were connections with Cavell. When my grandfather, who's from Karwar, from this place called Sadashivgarh, my paternal grandfather, when he moved to Bombay, he first came and lived in a kud, which was exactly opposite Cavell. For those who don't know, kuds are clubs, and I'm sure a lot of Goans would know that, but in Bombay you have every neighborhood perhaps in Goa would have their own club in Bombay where you could come and reside. And that would be the same for people in Karwar. So my grandfather moved to Cavell. That was the first time he did. And this was in the 1940s, perhaps. And we came to live in Cavell eventually 60 years later. So I saw these connections, and I wanted to understand and make sense of it. And why Cavell must have been so great, and why it is the way it is now. Speaking to older residents, those in their 70s and 80s, gave me a sense of that place. And this was out of pure curiosity. I was not looking at writing a book. I was just curious about Cavell in the 40s and 50s. And I would just talk to older residents. And eventually, I think, 10 to 15 years later, the book happened. And the book happened, I think it started with pure sense of nostalgia because I had briefly moved to Muscat. I also was raised in Muscat, so I briefly moved to Muscat to work there. And that's when I started yearning for home, yearning for Bombay, and I think missing the place made me write about it. And I started developing connections. They were meant to be short stories, but I started developing connections between my stories. And I realized at some point that I probably had a novel. And yes, that is how the story began. But it took some time. Writing a sentimental book without any purpose sometimes really, I don't know how much it would endear the reader. So I wanted to make this neighborhood the protagonist of the book. And probably learning about the history, speaking to more people, it helped make this book what it became of, say, 4 or 5 years down the lane.
Thank you so much for that. Actually, it is really a lovely job. It's interesting to see a neighborhood like that, which has been written about. So, Bai and I have, at the Goa Arts and Literature Festival, Teresa Albuquerque actually launched her book on Bombay here, and Cavell plays a big role in it because Alphonse Mudeau, these people who first became very significant in the making of Bombay, the migration happens in the 19th century after the French occupation. But this thing about kurds, bhai, and also this thing about a kurd from Karwar, I didn't know anything about this. You would be able to shed some light, perhaps.
Yeah, during my childhood, or rather when I went to college in early 60s, I visited all these pockets where Goans lived. I remember Cavell, I remember Mazgaon, I remember Kud, along near Princess Street, near Metro. So, and I would love to go there because invariably I would meet some people whom I knew or they knew me. either from Mutharda, Madhurda, and it was wonderful. Madhode Karanchi Kud, Banavle Karanchi Kud, Kulve Karanchi Kud. It was, but also it reflected on the mentality of Goans and particularly the caste consciousness you could easily see there. Yeah, that was something disturbing also at the same time for me. But then Kavel is something special. Maka Dunuguda Sasa, Bandra Gelloto, that locality. When I started reading this, I could visualize, and I was surprised when she is so young. How do you know about Kavel of that time? And Kavel, Goinkara Khabarna Ashini, you can see in theatre. Every now and then you will find Kavelachi Sundari. Is it that name?
Yes.
I don't remember.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Kavelachi Sundari, Kavel mein khabar nasil denna. But Kavelachi Sundari is that Kavel again. So Kavel is something, pocket of Goans. And when she says she felt nostalgic, she did not feel nostalgic about Goa. She felt nostalgic about Kavel, another Goa in Mumbai. So this is something special about it. Wherever Goans go, they take Goa with them and settle there.
Apparently including caste. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's interesting that Mr. Mauzo mentioned that. And that is one of the reasons I mentioned that when I moved to Cavell, I thought it was a very gated neighborhood. Neighbors who were very uptight, and I didn't understand that. And, the caste was playing out. I don't know if it was caste or class. It's very difficult to say that. But I live in a compound where intermingling, from what I hear from older residents, was not encouraged with people from, say, just 2 roads, not even 2, maybe a lane across. There's a lane called 191 Lane in Cavell, and I write about it in the book. I just changed the names, where you have a lot of these. You have 2-3 clubs. You have people who've really struggled to find their way up, and small tenements where they live in the size of probably one's kitchen. And they form the heart of Cavell, because the largest number of residents from, or we call the parish, the parishioners come from 191 Lane. And they gave Cavell the energy that Cavell had. Today, the reason why Cavell is what it is because 191 Lane has been cleared to make way for redevelopment projects. And all the residents, perhaps like 80% of the residents have moved, even if temporarily. But it reflects on the church and every activity that takes place in the parish. It's very dead, it's very quiet. But I was very surprised that this kind of intermingling was discouraged. And for the longest time, I did not understand whether, because caste was never something that was spoken about in our house. I know my grandma who's from Goa, my paternal side grandma, who kept referring to the fact that her mother was a Goan Brahmin. And she married someone, a Tarvoti, which I think she possibly held against her mother for the longest time, because it meant to them that they were denied a lot of opportunities as children. But I didn't understand, but it is something that you see every day in Cavell. People it's discouraged. There are communities where you do not, you might love to be friends with them, but probably marriage, it becomes the talk of the town that this happened. Again, another interesting thing that I was told, I didn't see it because it didn't happen in my lifetime, but an older resident, Ervil Menezes, he's a senior journalist who was from Goa and was a former resident of Cavell. He told me that because Cavell used to be an East Indian pocket, Goans were not allowed to take up the front rows. In the beginning, at least, when they moved, there was a lot of friction between the East Indians and the Goans, because the Goans came in, they completely overrun this neighborhood, and that leads to a lot of insecurity at that time.
I spent some time recently looking at that's like the formation of East Indian identity. Actually,
yes, this was the time.
In reaction to the arrival of the Goans in such large numbers. It's interesting, inside or outside, all the questions that are coming up in this, and looking at a pocket like that in Bombay is interesting. I want to ask you one of the things that now we are all emerging from the pandemic. Jane, by the way, is a very fine city journalist. I'm a big fan of city journalism, people who cover their city with a lot of passion, having been raised reading it in various places. And Jane does a fantastic job for Midday. I really like it. It's a vibrant coverage of the city in a very fine tradition. Actually, we had the Mumbai Mirror was excellent in that genre. Also, alas, it's gone, right? There's
Yes,
no
they
paper.
just have a Sunday edition, but that's about it. Very slim.
Yeah, there was who's the editor? She's a wonderful.
Meenal Baghel.
Meenal Baghel, really wonderful writer. And Jane's first book was about crime, actually. I actually have that book as well. But I wanted to ask you, in these complexities, in this insider-outsider debate, and with all the nativism, are there advantages to Cavell still? Is there an advantage? Are you feeling besieged? Is it like Asterix's village, or is there an ability to kind of adapt and still take on the new coming challenges?
It's a challenging question because I think one of the reasons why I wrote the book, Vivek, is to instill pride among residents like Cavell for their neighborhoods. Something that I found lacking. I remember when this book came out, a couple of residents asked me, why Cavell? And what do you see in Cavell that we don't? Probably because I had lived there just about 20 years, so I was perhaps an outsider. They were very much insiders, and they didn't see merit in a book considering what had become of Cavell. And that is what I hoped to do when I was writing. I think as a journalist, you're always asking yourself so many questions. Why you're writing this book? Is it just fiction? Which is what I said, I didn't want it to be a sentimental, nostalgic novel alone. It had to have, there was a reason why I was telling this story. Or peopling it with so many characters, different types of characters, because I wanted everyone to identify with somebody out there in the neighborhood and say that, oh, this could have happened to me, or this perhaps happened to somebody I know. What has happened perhaps with this book and is it has drawn some interest within community members who've asked questions about their neighborhood. So an interesting thing that happened is that I started an oral memory project last year called Soboikar, which is a pun on Sobo, which is Soboites. We call all residents in South Bombay Soboites, and Bombaykar, Goans who refer to them, Goans from Bombay. So it's a pun on that. But how that started was interesting because there's my partner in the project, Sheena Maria Piedad, she lives in Dabul, which is, her family comes from Dabul, which is 2 blocks away, but she's only spent her summer holidays there and never really engaged with the neighborhood. She happened to read Bombay Balchao while sitting in Pune and started going back, maybe revisiting family albums, looking at pictures, trying to identify places that I had mentioned in the book, and was able to kind of create a portrait about Dabul. Where the book was about Cavell, she started thinking about Dabul, and she wrote to me and asking, is there a way we can do something about this to keep our neighborhoods alive? Because I don't know anything about my neighborhood, a place that 2 generations of or 3 generations of my family lived in. And that's how we started this oral memory project with the Citizens Archive of India, which is headed by the amazing Malvika Bhatia. And we've started interviewing Catholics from Bombay, Mangalore, or different parts of Konkan, and asking them, it's a very, very interesting, nostalgic interview because we're just trying to understand what brought them to Bombay and probably what made them leave or move to the suburbs, because that's what's happening in South Bombay right now. People are leaving the city probably because homes are getting crammed for them, probably they're too small, they're leaving for the suburbs, possibly abroad because they do not see any reason to be here. We wanted to understand why they came here in the first place, and that's how the Oral Memory Project started. We've interviewed about 7 people as of now, And it's too early to talk about it, but what I'm seeing is very interesting patterns. Like one of my first interviews was with my aunt, my mom's sister-in-law, Vivian Godet, and she mentioned the Bell of Cavell, which is the theatre that is now being, apparently Frederick Nerona told me that it's being staged in Panjim. It's called Kavelchi Sundari. And she mentioned Bell of Cavell as a song that was sung at every gathering or get-together. So I'm guessing someone has written this at some point, and it's become so popular that it still exists in our memories in different ways. So that is interesting. So I'm seeing these lovely patterns emerging, and the reasons for why they came are perhaps the same, probably education, employment, and better opportunities. And the same reasons are taking them away from Cavell right now, or neighborhoods like Cavell.
Right. What a wonderful retrieval of memory. Actually, I'm struck by that, I have also roots in South Bombay. But South Bombay's history is connected to Goa in many ways. And today, it's being Statehood Day, I'd like to mention one which most people here might not make the immediate connection. But one of the reasons that there was a precipitate kind of urgency to take Goa, against the absolutely recalcitrant and unnecessary Portuguese colonial rule. But one of the reasons it happened at the time it did is because Krishna Menon was running for the seat of South Bombay. And there was a need for him to, I'm sure you can probably shed a little bit, there was a need to show that there was because he was under fire in different ways, and he won that election. But and of course we got liberation on Statehood Day. We should acknowledge that. Bhai, I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience. But this thing about Bomoikar, Soboikar is a lovely coinage because it adds the snobbishness of Soboikar, Sobo to Bomoikar. But Bhai, what does Bomoikar mean?
No. In fact, just like in Goa, in Mumbai also, there were two kinds of Goans: Mumbaikar and Bomoikar. Very
What's
sad.
the difference?
Those people call Mumbai as Mumbai, and those who call it Bombay. So there was split between Hindus and Catholics. So even in Bandra, when I went, I found this distinction. Sometimes as a real true Goaikar, I found it was strange when I traveled in Mumbai, when I went to Cood. And suddenly one day I found some Hindu guy in a Cood. That's because he was accepted as their own. I don't know why, but then they never accepted the other caste people inside.
Strange, yeah.
So that was strange, yeah. Anyway, I don't know whether it
There
exists.
are all kinds of intricate, so I having belonged to that society for a while, there are all kinds of intricate rules. And so many of those rules are unsaid. And some of those rules I have not figured out till today, but they're unsaid and they're out there. Some questions? How about you comment on this whole thing?
I wanted to know, but I'm Ashley DeMello,
Hello, sir.
journalist from Mumbai.
Hello.
And I wanted to ask you, I liked your book. I was there for the interview on the net between you and Vivek.
Yes.
Yeah, some time ago. And the rivalry with the East Indian Goans and Mangaloreans, how does it play out today? Because in earlier years, I know marriages were broken.
Yes.
And in the case of Frank Moraes, the famous journalist, when he married a prominent East Indian from Bandra, from the De Monte family, there was a lot of opposition because she was marrying a Goan. And then when her younger sister was planning to marry a Goan, it seems the old De Monte managed to get him roughed up, dissuade him from marrying his daughter. And this was undertaken, and I asked Darrell De Monte about it. He told me yes, and the guy who did the job was a well-known Parsi gentleman from Bandra who arranged to have that guy roughed up. Rebello, his name was.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, actually in my family, so my aunt, who is an East Indian, she got married to a Mangalorean, and this is in the 1960s, and my uncle moved to Cavell with her. when I asked, and this is part of the memory project that I was doing, when I asked a couple of residents about how this rivalry played out between the Goans, Mangalorians, East Indians, I was surprised to hear that at that time, I'm saying the mid-1900s, it was not this rivalry as much as class that was a problem. I don't think by then they would identify themselves as East Indians, Goans, and Mangalorians. Firstly, none of them spoke the native language. What is very interesting is, say, I come from this compound called Popestown, and most of them don't speak Konkani. But interestingly, the residents from 191 Lane only speak in Konkani. Language became a way of expressing your class. And that is something that I saw was very, very distinctly different. So maybe not in their time, but yes, I've heard stray stories about East Indians being, or Goan and Mangalorian families trying to prevent marriages with the East Indians. But it's not so much right now in Cavell. Cavell is anyway such a shrinking community at this point. Any kind of marriage or procreation would help, encourage. I think the residents would encourage anything to help keep this community alive, but unfortunately not so. Like in my building, three homes are occupied and 3 aren't. The same is about the the building next to mine. 4 homes occupied, 4 aren't. So I wish all of these homes, whoever the families or the descendants, would come back and try and at least see the magic of this neighborhood. I think the magic is still there. It's just that and there is no one to, spark that.
That's exactly what you're doing, Jane. And,
Thank you.
And before you stop, please tell us a little bit about the filming, the deal that you've signed about it being filmed.
So I'm not allowed to mention the production house, but yes, it's a leading production house that's bought the rights for Bombay Balchao. And while they haven't told me whether this is going to be for OTT or for film, I see this as a project that would automatically translate as a web series because it's written in an episodic fashion. So that is what I can say for now. Perhaps when they're still working on the creative team and putting it together. So once that happens, perhaps Gawel will be a movie and more people will know about our Catholic neighborhoods.
Thank you so much. Big hand for Jane Borges. Thank you so much, Bai, for launching the book. Please keep your seats for the next session. I apologize for the delay in today's program, for due to unavoidable